After two betrayals, a black girl saves a millionaire's life, signs a contract, and finds true love with Triplets. Welcome, beautiful souls. Is this your first time here, or are you already part of our cherished family? Drop your name below. We'd love to connect with you. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this magical journey. Take a deep breath. Our story begins now, with love. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Manhattan's steel horizon as Waylon Colton stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. At 24, he cut an impressive figure against the cityscape. Tall, broad-shouldered, with penetrating crystal blue eyes that seemed to look straight through to the soul of anyone they fixed upon. His perfectly tailored charcoal suit spoke of success, but it was the quiet intensity in his bearing that truly commanded attention. Running his fingers through his dark hair, slightly silver at the temples despite his youth, a hereditary trait from his father, Waylon reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The Colton Industries logo gleamed 40 stories below, a testament to his relentless drive and unwavering principles. "Mr. Colton," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The morning briefing is ready." "Thank you, Margaret," he responded, his voice carrying the warm timbre that had become legendary among his employees. Margaret had been with him since the beginning, when Colton Industries was nothing more than a dream in a cramped office in Brooklyn. The conference room buzzed with energy as Waylon entered. 20 department heads rose in unison, not out of corporate protocol, but genuine respect. He'd handpicked each one, often seeing potential where others saw only inexperience. Sarah Chen, his head of innovation, had been a brilliant but overlooked analyst at a competing firm. James Rodriguez, now leading their international division, was a janitor's son with an extraordinary mind for global economics. "Please sit," Waylon smiled, taking his place at the head of the table. "And someone, please tell me they brought those incredible croissants from Pierre's again." Laughter rippled through the room. It was these moments, the human touches, the shared jokes, that set Colton Industries apart from its corporate competitors. Waylon had built more than a company. He'd created a family. The morning's agenda unfolded with practiced efficiency. Market reports, development updates, charity initiatives, each presentation reflecting the company's dual commitment to excellence and social responsibility. Waylon listened intently, asking questions that showed not just understanding, but genuine interest in every aspect of his empire. And finally, Sarah concluded, "The Children's Hospital project is ahead of schedule. We'll be able to open the new wing 3 months early." Waylon's eyes lit up. The hospital project was close to his heart, inspired by his own childhood experiences. At 8, he'd spent 6 months in a hospital fighting pneumonia, watching his parents struggle with mounting medical bills. That memory drove his determination to make healthcare accessible to every child, regardless of their family's financial situation. After the meeting, Waylon walked the office floors, something he did every morning without fail. He stopped at every desk, remembering names, asking about families, celebrating small victories. When Jerry from accounting mentioned his daughter's college acceptance, Waylon immediately arranged for a scholarship through the company's education fund. When Maria from HR spoke of her mother's illness, he ensured she had the best medical care available. By noon, he was back in his office, reviewing expansion plans for the Asian market. The numbers were promising, but something felt off. Waylon had learned to trust his instincts. They'd saved him from countless pitfalls in his meteoric rise to success. "Margaret," he called through the intercom, "could you get me the cultural impact assessment for the Soul project?" "Right away, sir. And your mother called again?" Waylon sighed, running a hand over his face. Eleanor Colton, the formidable matriarch of the family, had been not so subtly pushing him toward settling down. "A man needs more than spreadsheets to warm his bed," she'd declared at their last Sunday dinner. The truth was, Wayland's success in business was matched only by his solitude in personal matters. His childhood sweetheart had left him for his best friend in college. Since then, relationships had taken a back seat to his ambitions. He'd dated, of course. It was expected in his social circle, but nothing had progressed beyond surface-level connections. The afternoon brought a series of meetings with potential investors. Wayland's reputation preceded him, not just for his business acumen, but for his integrity. In an industry where cutting corners was common practice, he stood firm in his principles. It had cost him deals in the early days, but now it was his greatest asset. Mr. Colton, a visiting CEO, had once remarked, "Your word is worth more than any contract." As evening approached, most employees had headed home, but lights still burned in several offices. Wayland made another round, checking on those working late. He found Thomas, a junior analyst, struggling with a complex market analysis. "Here," Wayland pulled up a chair. "Let me show you something my father taught me." For the next hour, they worked together, the billionaire CEO and the entry-level analyst, breaking down complex data into manageable pieces. It was moments like these that defined Wayland's leadership style: hands-on, nurturing, focused on growth rather than hierarchy. The city lights twinkled like earthbound stars as Wayland finally prepared to leave. His driver, Marcus, waited patiently in the underground garage. "Home, sir?" "Actually, Marcus, let's stop by St. Mary's first." St. Mary's Hospital was where Wayland had spent those long months as a child. Now he visited regularly, reading stories to sick children, bringing gifts, offering hope. Tonight, he spent 2 hours with a young boy fighting leukemia, teaching him chess and sharing stories of his own hospital stay. "You'll beat this, Tommy," he promised, squeezing the boy's frail hand. "And when you do, there's an internship waiting for you at Colton Industries." The clock struck midnight as Wayland finally entered his penthouse apartment. The space was immaculate, decorated with tasteful artwork and modern furniture, yet somehow lacking the warmth of a home. He loosened his tie, poured himself a glass of scotch, and stood at his living room windows, looking out over the city he'd conquered. Success had come early to Wayland Colton, built on a foundation of integrity, innovation, and genuine care for others. His employees spoke of his kindness in hushed, reverent tones. The CEO who remembered everyone's birthdays, who stayed late to help junior staff, who turned no one away who needed help. Yet behind the successful facade lay a heart yearning for something more. The empire he'd built, impressive as it was, felt incomplete without someone to share it with. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "All this success means nothing if you have no one to come home to." As he prepared for bed, Wayland caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. At 24, he had achieved what most people could only dream of, but the cost had been high. The slight shadows under his eyes spoke of countless late nights, the faint lines around his mouth hinted at decisions that kept him awake, and the solitude in his gaze revealed the price of putting business before personal happiness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to make a difference in people's lives. But tonight, in the quiet of his luxurious but empty apartment, Wayland Colton, the rising star of the business world, allowed himself to acknowledge the void in his heart, a void that no amount of success could fill. Little did he know that fate had plans for him, plans that would test his resilience, challenge his beliefs, and ultimately lead him down a path of love, betrayal, and redemption that would transform not just his life, but the lives of countless others. The rising star was about to face storms that would either extinguish his light or make it shine brighter than ever before. As sleep finally claimed him, his last thoughts were of his mother's words at Sunday dinner. "The heart, my dear boy, has its own business plan. and sooner or later you'll have to deal with its merger proposals. The city below never slept, its rhythm matching the restless dreams of the man who had conquered its business world but had yet to master the art of love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, Wayland Colton slept, unaware that his greatest test would not come from the boardroom, but from the battlefield of the heart. Chapter 2. The First Betrayal. Victoria Sterling entered Wayland's life like a masterpiece of calculated timing. It was at the annual Entrepreneurs Gala, where the city's elite gathered to showcase their success and scout new opportunities. She stood out in a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns, wearing a deep burgundy dress that seemed to catch every light in the room. Her golden hair cascaded over one shoulder, and her emerald eyes held secrets that Wayland would later wish he'd recognized sooner. "Mr. Colton," she'd said, extending a perfectly manicured hand, "your speech about sustainable business practices was fascinating. I'd love to hear more about your vision for corporate responsibility." That was her first move in a game Wayland didn't know they were playing. Her background was impeccable. Daughter of a retired judge, graduate of Princeton, working as a consultant for environmental nonprofits. Every detail of her life story seemed designed to appeal to Wayland's ideals and values. Their courtship was a whirlwind of perfectly orchestrated moments. Victoria appeared passionate about his charitable initiatives, offering innovative suggestions for the Children's Hospital Project. She attended board meetings as his guest, charming executives with her intelligence and wit. When she spoke about sustainable business practices, her eyes sparkled with what Wayland mistook for genuine enthusiasm. "She's different," he told his mother over Sunday dinner, 3 months into their relationship. "She understands what we're trying to build here." Eleanor Colton had simply pressed her lips together, years of maternal instinct warring with her desire to see her son happy. "Just remember, darling, that not all investments yield the returns they promise." But Wayland was already too far gone, caught in the undertow of what he believed was true love. Victoria's presence filled the void he'd carried for so long. She seemed to anticipate his needs, share his dreams, complement his vision for the future. When she moved into his penthouse apartment, it finally felt like a home. The proposal came 6 months after they met. Wayland had the entire rooftop garden of his building transformed into a magical scene. Thousands of twinkling lights, rare orchids, her favorite, and a string quartet playing softly in the background. Victoria's tears seemed genuine as he knelt before her, offering not just a ring but his heart, his trust, and access to his world. Their wedding was the social event of the season. The New York Times called it a union of power and grace. 800 guests witnessed their vows in St. Patrick's Cathedral, where Victoria, radiant in Vera Wang, promised to love, honor, and cherish. Later, Wayland would replay those words in his mind, searching for the subtle signs of deception he must have missed. The first few months of marriage were a masterclass in manipulation. Victoria gradually integrated herself into every aspect of Wayland's life. She suggested hiring her college friend, Michael Bennett, as their personal financial advisor. "Darling, you work so hard," she'd cooed. "Let someone else handle the day-to-day money matters." Michael was smooth, professional, and came with stellar recommendations, all carefully fabricated, as Wayland would later discover. He began by managing their personal accounts, then slowly gained access to more sensitive financial information through Victoria's subtle influence. The signs were there, but love had blinded Wayland to them. The late-night phone calls Victoria claimed were about charity work. The mysterious appointments that always seemed to coincide with major financial transactions. The subtle suggestions about consolidating accounts and updating signatures on key documents. It was Margaret, his loyal assistant, who first tried to raise the alarm. "Mr. Colton," she'd said hesitantly one morning, There are some unusual patterns in the charitable donations accounts, but Victoria had anticipated this. "Poor Margaret," she told Wayland over dinner that night. "She's always been so devoted to you. It must be hard for her to accept that you have someone else to trust now." The truth unfolded on a rainy Tuesday in October, 6 months into their marriage. Wayland had been working late, trying to reconcile some discrepancies in the company's charitable giving accounts, numbers that didn't quite add up, transactions that seemed just slightly off. A pattern began to emerge, one that led to a series of offshore accounts and carefully hidden transfers. He decided to surprise Victoria with lunch the next day, hoping to discuss his concerns. The surprise, however, was entirely his. Through the window of La Grenouille, their favorite restaurant, he saw her sitting in a private booth with Michael. They weren't reviewing financial documents. Wayland stood frozen outside the restaurant, the rain soaking through his expensive suit as he watched his wife and his financial advisor in an intimate embrace. Their conversation, carried through the partially open window, shattered his world. "Everything's in place," Michael was saying, his fingers intertwined with Victoria's. "The transfers are untraceable. By the time he figures it out, we'll be halfway to the Cayman Islands." Victoria's laugh, that melodious sound that had once filled Wayland's heart with joy, now cut through him like broken glass. Poor, trusting Wayland. He really believes in all that integrity and corporate responsibility nonsense. It made him such an easy mark. "2 more weeks," Michael replied, kissing her knuckles. "The final transfers will be complete, and we'll have enough to set us up for life. 10 million is a nice nest egg for our new start." "The best part is," Victoria smirked, "he'll probably blame himself. The great Wayland Colton, so focused on helping others that he couldn't see what was happening right under his nose." Wayland didn't confront them. Instead, he walked back to his office in the rain, each step feeling like lead. By the time he reached Colton Industries, he had already called his lawyer. Within hours, a team of forensic accountants was quietly tracking every transaction, every transfer, every document that had crossed Michael Bennett's desk. The evidence was damning. Victoria and Michael had been systematically siphoning money from both personal and charitable accounts, setting up an elaborate network of fake organizations and offshore transfers. They had targeted not just Wayland's personal wealth, but the funds meant for children's medical care, educational programs, and community development. The divorce papers were served the next morning. Victoria came home to find her access cards deactivated, her accounts frozen, and armed security waiting to escort her from the building. The look of shock on her face when she realized her carefully laid plans had crumbled would have been satisfying if Wayland's heart hadn't been so thoroughly shattered. The legal battle that followed was brief but vicious. Victoria's attempts to claim innocence crumbled in the face of overwhelming evidence. Michael's carefully constructed professional history unraveled, revealing a pattern of similar schemes at other companies. Both faced criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. But the real damage wasn't to Wayland's finances. Those could be recovered. It was his faith in love, in trust, in the basic goodness of people that lay in ruins. The man who had built an empire on believing in others now struggled to believe in anything. In the aftermath, Wayland threw himself into work with renewed intensity. He implemented stricter financial controls, reviewed every charitable partnership personally, and kept everyone at arm's length. The warm, approachable CEO became more reserved, his trademark smile appearing less frequently. Eleanor Colton watched her son retreat behind walls of his own making, his heart hardening like steel tempered in fire. "Don't let her steal your capacity for love," she pleaded. "That would be the greatest theft of all." But Wayland couldn't unhear Victoria's words, couldn't unsee her cruel smile as she plotted to destroy not just him, but the good work he'd dedicated his life to. The betrayal had shown him the dark side of trust. the poison that could hide behind the sweetest smile. As autumn faded into winter, Wayland stood once again at his office window, watching the city lights blur through the falling snow. He was wiser now, more cautious, but also more alone than ever. The ring finger on his left hand felt naked, a constant reminder of dreams shattered and trust betrayed. Little did he know that this was only the first act in a longer drama of heartbreak and redemption. The universe wasn't finished with Wayland Colton, not by a long shot. But for now, he stood alone in his tower of success, a young king whose crown had become a burden, whose throne had become a prison of solitude. The city below continued its endless dance of light and shadow, much like the conflicting emotions in Wayland's heart. Somewhere out there, another chapter of his story was waiting to unfold, but for now the wounds were too fresh, the lessons too painful to ignore. The rising star had encountered his first dark cloud, and the storm was far from over. Chapter 3. A Second Chance at Love. 4 years had transformed Wayland Colton in ways that went beyond his prematurely graying temples and the new lines etched around his eyes. At 28, he had rebuilt not just his company's financial safeguards, but his reputation as one of the most formidable businessmen in New York. The betrayal by Victoria had taught him valuable lessons, though each came with a price paid in trust and innocence lost. Colton Industries now occupied 3 towers in Manhattan's business district, its influence stretching across continents. Wayland's office, now on the 65th floor, offered a view that made even seasoned executives catch their breath. But it was in a small tech startup conference room in Seattle where fate decided to rewrite his story. Sarah Chen wasn't supposed to be at the meeting. As a brilliant but overlooked software engineer at Rival Tech, she normally wouldn't have been included in acquisition discussions. But a last-minute server crisis had forced her presence, and as she expertly explained the technical architecture that made her company valuable, Wayland found himself watching her hands move with passionate precision through the air. The neural network adaptation isn't just about processing speed, she was saying, her dark eyes alight with enthusiasm. It's about understanding human behavior patterns in real time. This could revolutionize how we approach charitable giving. That last part caught Wayland's attention. Since Victoria's attempt to drain his charitable foundations, he'd been obsessed with creating foolproof systems for philanthropy. Sarah's innovation seemed to offer something he hadn't even known he was looking for. "Ms. Chen," he interrupted, his voice carrying that quiet authority that had become his trademark. "Would you mind staying after to discuss this further?" The meeting room emptied, leaving them alone with ideas and possibilities hanging in the air between them. Sarah pulled up complex diagrams on her tablet, explaining concepts that would have lost most audiences. But Wayland followed every word, asking questions that revealed not just understanding, but genuine vision. "Mr. Colton," she said finally, tucking a strand of black hair behind her ear, "you actually understand the technical aspects. That's unusual for a CEO." "Please call me Wayland," he replied, surprising himself with the informality. "And I believe in knowing every aspect of what we do. Technology isn't just tools, it's the language of the future." That first conversation lasted 3 hours. They moved from technical specifications to philosophical discussions about technology's role in social change. Sarah's passion for using innovation to help others resonated with something deep in Wayland's soul, a part he thought had died with Victoria's betrayal. The acquisition of Rival Tech was completed within a month, but it was Sarah's mind that proved to be the real asset. She brought fresh perspectives to every project, challenging assumptions and pushing boundaries. Wayland found himself looking forward to their meetings, enjoying the intellectual sparring and shared vision for technology's potential. Their first dinner was ostensibly about discussing the integration of Rival Tech systems. They met at a small Vietnamese restaurant, Sarah's choice, away from the usual corporate haunts. The PHO here reminds me of my grandmother's, she explained, her usual professional demeanor softening. She taught me that excellence doesn't always wear a designer label. Wayland found himself sharing stories about his own family, about Eleanor's wisdom and his father's integrity. The conversation flowed as naturally as the jasmine tea they shared, and for the first time in years he felt the walls around his heart wavering. Sarah was different from Victoria in every way. Where Victoria had been all polished surface and calculated charm, Sarah was authentically herself, brilliant, occasionally awkward, and unafraid to challenge him. She wore simple clothes, drove a modest car, and spent her free time teaching coding to underprivileged kids. Their working relationship evolved slowly into friendship, and then, almost imperceptibly, into something more. Wayland found himself seeking her opinion on matters far beyond her technical expertise. Sarah became a regular at family dinners, where Eleanor Colton watched with quiet hope as her son gradually remembered how to smile. "She's good for you," Eleanor observed one Sunday evening, watching Sarah teach Wayland's young niece basic programming on a tablet. "She sees the man behind the empire." The transition from colleagues to couple happened naturally, without grand gestures or public declarations. Their first kiss wasn't in some fancy restaurant, but in Wayland's office at midnight, surrounded by holographic displays of their latest charitable initiative, a global education platform. "I think we've found the solution," Sarah had exclaimed, her eyes bright with triumph as she spotted the key algorithm they needed. Wayland had looked at her then, really looked at her, and seen not just a brilliant mind, but a beautiful soul that somehow made his world brighter. The kiss was gentle, tentative, carrying the weight of past wounds and future hopes. When they broke apart, Sarah's smile held understanding and something more, a promise of patience, of building something real together. Their relationship developed with the same thoughtful precision they brought to their work. They took things slowly, each step forward carefully considered. Wayland found himself opening up about Victoria, about the betrayal that had nearly destroyed his faith in love. Sarah listened without judgment, sharing her own stories of heartbreak and resilience. "We're not our past wounds," she told him one evening as they walked through Central Park. "We're what we choose to build from them." 2 years passed like this, building trust, sharing dreams, creating something that seemed unbreakable. Sarah became integrated into every aspect of Wayland's life, her innovative spirit breathing new life into Colton Industries. Together, they launched initiatives that combined technology with humanitarian goals, earning recognition from global leaders. The press called them the power couple of progressive business. But their real strength lay in quiet moments, late-night coding sessions that turned into deep conversations, weekend visits to tech education centers they'd established in underprivileged areas, simple dinners where they dreamed up ways to change the world. Wayland began to believe in love again, in the possibility of a future that included more than just business success. Sarah's presence in his life helped heal old wounds, showing him that true partnership was about growing together, challenging each other, building something meaningful. Eleanor Colton watched her son's transformation with joy, seeing the return of the warm, passionate man who had been hidden behind walls of protective ice. "Love," she told him, "is like good code. It needs both logic and creativity to work properly." The merger with Chen Innovations, Sarah's own startup, was seen as a natural progression of their partnership. The business world celebrated the union of two technological powerhouses, not knowing that Wayland was planning a more personal merger. He had the ring designed to reflect their shared vision, a platinum band with an elegant circuit board pattern etched in diamonds, surrounding a rare blue diamond that matched Sarah's innovative spirit. The proposal would combine their love of technology with their commitment to social impact. a virtual reality experience that would take them through the milestones of their relationship while showcasing the lives they'd helped change together. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. As Wayland stood in his office, finalizing the details of the proposal plan, he couldn't know that fate had other ideas. The storm that would shatter his reconstructed world was gathering strength, preparing to test his resilience in ways he couldn't imagine. Sarah Chen had helped him believe in love again, had shown him that trust could be rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. But as the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows through his office windows, destiny was preparing to teach Wayland Colton that sometimes the hardest falls come not from obvious enemies, but from those we trust most completely. The chapter of second chances was about to close, but not before teaching him lessons that would echo through the years to come. As night fell over the city, Wayland stood at his window, watching lights flicker on across the skyline, unaware that his world was about to change forever. The man who had learned to love again was about to learn an even harder lesson about trust, betrayal, and the true cost of opening one's heart. Chapter 4. History repeats. The Morgan and Associates merger was set to be the crown jewel of Colton Industries' expansion. James Morgan had built his tech empire from scratch, much like Wayland, but with a reputation for aggressive tactics that contrasted sharply with Colton's ethical approach. The merger would combine Morgan's cutting-edge innovations with Colton's global reach, creating a technological powerhouse that could reshape the industry. That fateful morning dawned crisp and clear, New York's skyline painted in autumn's golden light. Wayland arrived at the office early, as was his habit, the weight of the engagement ring in his jacket pocket adding an extra spring to his step. The proposal was planned for that evening, a perfect celebration after the merger signing. "The board meeting's been moved up to 9 a.m., Margaret informed him, her voice carrying an odd note that Wayland, distracted by thoughts of the evening ahead, failed to notice. And Ms. Chen requested access to the secure servers for final technical integration checks. The merger documentation sat in neat stacks in the main conference room, each page representing months of negotiation and due diligence. Wayland decided to review them one final time before the board arrived. As he approached the conference room's glass doors, the scene that greeted him stopped him cold. Sarah Chen, the woman who had rebuilt his faith in love, was locked in an intimate embrace with James Morgan. Spreadsheets and technical documents were scattered across the table, but it wasn't business they were discussing. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting harsh light on a betrayal that would haunt Wayland for years to come. "The security protocols are completely mapped," Sarah was saying, her fingers tracing patterns on Morgan's chest, fingers that had so often intertwined with Wayland's own. "Once the merger is signed, we'll have full access to their proprietary systems." "Brilliant work, darling," Morgan's voice dripped with satisfaction. "Colton's so caught up in his ethical business practices, he never thought to look deeper into our technical integration requests. His trust in you made this almost too easy." Sarah's laugh, that sound that had once been music to Wayland's ears, now cut through him like shattered glass. "Poor Wayland, always believing the best in people. Did you know he's planning to propose? He actually thinks we're building a future together." "Well, we are building a future," Morgan smirked, pulling her closer, "just not the one he imagined. Once we have control of his systems, we'll be able to redirect those humanitarian project funds into our own ventures. All that bleeding heart charity money finally put to proper use. The best part is his security team's focus on external threats," Sarah continued, pride evident in her voice. "They never considered that the real threat would come from their beloved innovation director. I've had access to everything for months. The back doors are already in place." Wayland stood frozen, his hand still on the door handle. The ring in his pocket felt like it was burning through his jacket, branding him with his own foolishness. 2 years of shared dreams, of building trust, of opening his heart. All of it had been an elaborate scheme, but it was Sarah's next words that truly drove the knife home. "You know what's truly pathetic? He actually helped me design the systems we'll use to drain his charitable foundations. All that talk about using technology for social good, he'll never see it coming when his own innovations are used to destroy everything he's built." The sound of approaching footsteps finally broke Wayland's paralysis. He stepped back from the door, decades of business training taking over as his personal world crumbled. His mind raced through the implications, not just for him, but for the thousands of people who depended on Colton Industries' humanitarian projects. In his office, Wayland moved with mechanical precision. First, a call to his head of security, initiating Emergency Protocol Alpha, a complete system lockdown designed for exactly this type of corporate espionage. Then his legal team quietly assembled in a secure off-site location. Finally, a text to Margaret: "Cancel all meetings. Initiate Operation Blackout." Within minutes, alarms blared through the building, a routine security drill that served to clear non-essential personnel. Security teams moved with practiced efficiency, securing servers and isolating critical systems. In the conference room, Sarah and Morgan jumped apart at the sound, their expressions shifting from annoyance to growing concern as their access cards suddenly deactivated. Wayland watched through the security feeds as they tried to salvage their plan, desperately attempting to access systems that were already beyond their reach. Sarah's facade finally cracked when armed security arrived to escort them from the building. Her eyes searched the cameras, knowing Wayland would be watching. "You don't understand," she protested, her composure slipping. "We were going to revolutionize the industry. All that money wasted on charity could be funding real innovation." But Wayland wasn't watching anymore. In his office, he methodically removed every trace of Sarah from his life. Photos deleted, personal items boxed for security to dispose of, access codes changed. The ring, that symbol of hope and renewal, he dropped into his office safe, a reminder perhaps of lessons learned too late. The legal aftermath was swift and devastating. Sarah's betrayal had been thorough, but so had Wayland's security measures. Every system access, every modified line of code, every secret meeting with Morgan had been logged and documented. The evidence painted a picture of industrial espionage so brazen it made headlines across the globe. "Tech titans trust betrayed," screamed the New York Times. "Corporate romance turns to ruthless revenge," declared the Wall Street Journal. The business world watched in fascination as the story unfolded. The brilliant innovator who had wormed her way into both Colton's company and his heart, all in service of a hostile takeover. But the public drama paled in comparison to the private devastation. Wayland threw himself into damage control, working around the clock to protect his charitable initiatives. The betrayal had struck at the very core of his mission, using technology to help others. Sarah hadn't just tried to steal his company's assets, she had attempted to destroy everything he believed in. Late at night, alone in his office, Wayland finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The ring sat on his desk, its circuit board pattern now seeming like a cruel joke. He had trusted again, loved again, believed again. And again, that trust had been weaponized against him. Eleanor Colton found him there, standing at his window as the city lights blurred through unshed tears. She didn't offer platitudes or advice, just stood beside her son in silent support. "I should have known," Wayland finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "The signs were there, just like with Victoria. I chose not to see them." "The ability to trust after betrayal isn't weakness," Eleanor replied softly. "It's the greatest strength there is. Don't let them take that from you." But Wayland could feel his heart hardening, walls building higher than ever before. The young CEO who had believed in the power of trust and collaboration was gone, replaced by a man who saw threats in every smile, ulterior motives in every kindness. The merger with Morgan and Associates was obviously cancelled, the attempt at corporate espionage leading to federal investigations and criminal charges. Sarah Chen's brilliant career ended in disgrace, her innovations forever tainted by her betrayal. James Morgan's empire crumbled under the weight of revealed corruption. But the real casualty was Wayland's faith in love itself. Two devastating betrayals, each cutting deeper than the last, had left scars that seemed impossible to heal. The man who had once championed the integration of technology and humanity now retreated behind firewalls both digital and emotional. As autumn faded into winter, Wayland stood alone in his tower of success, surrounded by the empire he had built, but feeling more isolated than ever. The ring remained in his safe, a cold reminder of dreams shattered and trust betrayed. The city below continued its endless dance of light and shadow, unaware that one of its brightest stars had lost his way. Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. The ability to trust after betrayal isn't weakness. But as Wayland turned away from the window, he couldn't help but wonder, what if the ability to trust was actually the greatest weakness of all? The question would haunt him through the lonely years ahead, until fate decided to teach him one final, transformative lesson about love, trust, and the courage to believe again. Chapter 5. The Walls of Solitude. The transformation of Wayland Colton from compassionate visionary to the Ice King of industry wasn't an overnight metamorphosis. Like frost creeping across a window pane, the change spread gradually, crystallizing his heart with each passing season. The 15 years following Sarah's betrayal saw him rebuild not just his business empire, but his entire approach to life. At 30, Wayland's first act was to completely restructure Colton Industries' organizational hierarchy. Gone were the open-door policies and collaborative thinking sessions. In their place arose a labyrinth of security protocols and non-disclosure agreements. Every interaction was documented, every conversation recorded, every decision vetted through multiple layers of verification. "Mr. Colton seems different," whispered employees in break rooms and corridor corners. The CEO, who once remembered birthdays and attended office celebrations, now moved through the building like a ghost, surrounded by an impenetrable aura of authority and distance. The press dubbed him the Ice King after a particularly brutal hostile takeover of a competing tech firm. The company had been struggling, its CEO desperately seeking a partnership. Instead of the gentle acquisition he was known for, Wayland orchestrated a complete dismantling of the organization, salvaging only the profitable parts and discarding the rest. "Business isn't about sentiment," he told the board, his voice carrying a new edge that made even seasoned executives shift uncomfortably. "It's about survival and growth. Everything else is irrelevant." His mother watched this transformation with growing concern. Sunday dinners, once warm family gatherings, became tactical meetings where Eleanor tried to reach the sun she remembered beneath the frost. "Your father built this company on trust and human connection," she reminded him one evening as Wayland reviewed quarterly reports between courses. "And I'm building it into something that will survive in a world where trust is a liability," he responded, not looking up from his tablet. The lines around his eyes had deepened, his hair now more silver than dark, aging him beyond his years. Yet beneath the ice, Wayland's commitment to charitable causes remained, though transformed. Where once he had personally visited hospitals and schools, now he created automated systems for aid distribution. Efficiency replaced empathy, algorithms replaced human judgment. The help still reached those in need, but without the warmth that had once made Colton Industries special. At 35, he expanded aggressively into artificial intelligence, developing systems that could predict and prevent human error and human betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on those who remembered his earlier emphasis on human potential. "The future belongs to those who eliminate uncertainty," he declared at a tech conference, his speech going viral for its cold brilliance. Human emotion is the greatest source of uncertainty in any system. His personal life became a fortress of solitude. The penthouse apartment, once waiting to be filled with family and love, transformed into a minimalist sanctuary of glass and steel. Every element was controlled, predictable, safe. The only splash of color came from his mother's persistent gifts, plants and artwork that he tolerated but never truly saw. Working late one night, as he often did, Wayland found himself staring at his reflection in the office windows. At 40, his face had taken on a sculptured quality, as if the warmth had been chiseled away, leaving only sharp angles and ice-blue eyes that rarely softened. The ring from that day with Sarah remained in his safe, along with the shattered pieces of his engagement plans for Victoria. Two reminders of lessons learned at devastating cost. Sometimes, in rare moments of vulnerability, he would look at them, each one representing a death of something vital within him. His empire continued to grow, expanding across continents, but it was growth without joy, success without satisfaction. The business world marveled at his strategic genius, his unerring ability to predict market trends and capitalize on opportunities. None realized that his success came from a place of profound disconnection. He could see patterns clearly because he no longer felt anything when making decisions. At 42, during a rare moment of reflection, Wayland found himself analyzing his transformation as he would a business case study. The numbers were impressive: triple-digit growth, revolutionary technological advances, global impact in charitable giving. But the human cost, calculated in sleepless nights and empty relationships, remained unmeasured. Eleanor's persistence in maintaining their Sunday dinner tradition became the only constant connection to his former self. Though he often attended with his mind elsewhere, buried in reports or strategic planning, she never stopped trying to reach him. "You've built walls so high," she told him on his 44th birthday, "that you've forgotten there was once a garden inside them." The statement struck something in him, a chord of recognition that he quickly suppressed. The garden she spoke of had been vulnerable to weeds, to storms, to betrayal. His walls kept everything out, pain and joy alike. His reputation in the business world became legendary. Competitors feared him, partners respected him, everyone watched their steps around him. The nickname Ice King evolved from a media label to a title of fearsome respect. Young entrepreneurs studied his methods, trying to replicate his success while missing the crucial fact that his approach came at the cost of everything that made success worthwhile. At 45, Wayland Colton had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. His office at the top of Colton Tower offered a view of the entire city, but he rarely saw it, too focused on screens and spreadsheets that offered the comfort of predictability. The company's charitable work continued to expand, but now through complex algorithms and automated systems. The personal touch that had once made Colton Industries' philanthropy special was replaced by efficient but soulless processes. Help still reached those in need, but without the human connection that had once transformed lives. The irony wasn't lost on those who remembered the young visionary who had believed in the power of human potential. The man who had once spent hours teaching a young analyst now delegated such tasks to AI training programs. The CEO who had personally visited every new charitable project now reviewed them through virtual reality simulations. His daily routine became a masterpiece of efficiency and isolation. Meetings were conducted through holographic interfaces, decisions made through data analysis, human interaction minimized to essential exchanges only. Even his home life was automated to eliminate the need for personal staff. Yet sometimes, in the dead of night when the city slept and the walls of his empire felt more like a prison than a fortress, Wayland would find himself remembering. He would remember the warmth of shared dreams with Sarah, the excitement of building something meaningful with Victoria before it all fell apart. In these moments, the Ice King's crown felt heavy indeed. But these moments of vulnerability were brief, quickly frozen over by the protective layers of frost he had carefully cultivated. The world had taught him its lessons well, and he had learned them at the cost of his heart's warmth. Little did he know that fate had other plans. As he approached his 45th year, circumstances were aligning to challenge everything he had built, not his business empire but the walls around his heart. The Ice King's reign was about to face its greatest test, and the question remained, would the walls melt to reveal the garden his mother remembered, or would they prove too thick for even the warmest love to penetrate? The answer lay in an unexpected future, where a mother's dying wish would collide with a chance encounter, forcing Wayland Colton to confront the greatest risk of all, the risk of learning to trust again. Chapter 6. A Mother's Final Wish. Eleanor Colton had always been more than just a mother. She was the heartbeat of the Colton legacy. At 75, her silver hair and graceful bearing spoke of wisdom earned through decades of watching her family's triumphs and tribulations. But lately, a shadow had fallen across her usually bright eyes, a knowledge she carried like a precious burden. The Sunday dinner ritual had endured through all of Wayland's transformations. Through Victoria's betrayal, Sarah's deception, and the 15 years of increasing isolation that followed, Eleanor had maintained this one connection to her son's humanity. Tonight, however, was different. The autumn air carried a hint of finality as Wayland's car pulled up to the familiar brownstone. "Master Colton," his driver announced, "we've arrived." The house stood as it always had, a testament to old-world elegance in a city of glass and steel. Eleanor had refused all offers to move to a more modern residence, preferring the warmth of wood panels and the whispers of family history in every corner. Wayland entered using his key, the scent of his mother's signature roast welcoming him home. But tonight, instead of finding Eleanor in the kitchen, he discovered her in his father's old study, surrounded by family photographs and memories. "Mother?" His voice carried a note of concern he couldn't quite suppress. The Ice King's mask slipped slightly at the sight of her unusual positioning. Eleanor looked up, her smile warm but weighted with purpose. "Wayland, my darling boy, come. Sit with me a moment before dinner." He complied, years of ingrained respect overriding his usual business-first approach. The leather chair creaked familiarly as he sat, bringing back memories of childhood lectures and fatherly advice. "I had an interesting visit with Dr. Morrison today," Eleanor began, her fingers tracing the pattern on a photo frame, Wayland's college graduation, before Victoria, before the frost had set in. "Is everything all right?" For once, Wayland's tablet remained in his briefcase, his mother's tone demanding his full attention. Eleanor's smile held both love and sadness. "Not everything, no. The tests confirmed what I've suspected for some time. I have about 6 months, perhaps a year with treatment." The words fell like stones in a still pond, ripples of impact spreading through Wayland's carefully ordered world. For a moment, the Ice King facade cracked completely, revealing the sun beneath. "Treatment options? Specialists? I'll have my team compile a list of the world's best." "Wayland," his mother's voice, soft but firm, stopped him mid-sentence. "I've lived a full life, seen my son build an empire, but there's one thing I haven't seen, one thing that keeps me awake at night." She reached for his hand, her touch warm against his perpetually cold fingers. "I haven't seen you happy. Truly happy." "Mother, I'm successful beyond even father's greatest dreams. The company, is not what I'm talking about, and you know it." Eleanor's eyes held his, refusing to let him retreat behind corporate achievements. "You've built walls so high that even you can't remember what it was like to feel the sun." Wayland felt something crack inside his chest, a hairline fracture in the ice he'd spent years cultivating. "The sun burns, Mother. I learned that lesson twice. And yet without it, nothing grows." Eleanor reached for a leather-bound album, opening it to reveal photos from decades past. "Look at yourself here, at your father's retirement party. You were practically glowing with possibility." The young man in the photo seemed like a stranger, eyes bright with dreams, smile genuine and warm. Wayland almost couldn't recognize himself. "The world is different now," he argued, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "The world is exactly as it has always been, full of both darkness and light. It's our choice which we let define us." Eleanor closed the album gently. "Which brings me to my wish." Something in her tone made Wayland sit straighter, years of business instinct warning him of a negotiation he might not be prepared for. "I want you to marry before I go." The request hung in the air like crystal, beautiful and sharp. Wayland felt his walls snap back into place. "Mother, we've discussed this. Marriage is a risk, a vulnerability, a chance for betrayal." Eleanor's voice took on an edge he rarely heard. "Let me tell you what else it is. It's the reason you exist. It's why your father and I could build something lasting. It's what makes a house a home and an empire worth having. I've tried that path, twice." The words came out harsher than he intended. "You tried trusting the wrong people. But in protecting yourself from the wrong ones, you've closed yourself off from the right one." Eleanor stood, moving to the window where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of possibility. "I'm not asking you to repeat your past mistakes. I'm asking you to be brave enough to learn from them." "What exactly are you proposing?" The businessman in him needed specifics, parameters, controlled variables. Eleanor turned back to him, her face softened by the golden light. "Give love one more chance. Give love one more chance, not for the company, not for appearances, but for yourself, for the garden that used to grow inside those walls of yours." "And if I refuse?" The words felt like ash in his mouth. "Then you'll have to live with knowing you denied your mother's final wish." The statement held no manipulation, just simple truth. "But more importantly, you'll deny yourself the chance to remember who you were before the frost set in." Dinner that evening was quieter than usual, both mother and son lost in thought. The usual business discussions were replaced by the weight of words spoken and choices to be made. As Wayland prepared to leave, Eleanor handed him a small box. "Your father gave me this on our first anniversary. Inside is a letter he wrote about why love matters more than success. Read it when you're ready to remember what it means to feel warm again." The drive back to his penthouse was a blur of streetlights and memories. The box sat heavy in his pocket, a challenge to everything he'd built himself into over the past 15 years. In his stark, modern living room, Wayland finally opened it. His father's handwriting, strong and sure, filled the yellowed page. "My dearest Eleanor, today marks 1 year since you made me the richest man alive, not through business success or financial gain, but by choosing to share your life with mine. In you, I found something greater than achievement. I found purpose. A man can build empires of steel and glass, can accumulate wealth beyond measure, but without love to give it meaning, he builds nothing but a beautiful prison. Love is not a weakness to be guarded against, but a strength to be embraced. It's the foundation that makes everything else worthwhile. To love is to risk, yes, but to never love is to already have lost. Forever yours, Robert." The words seemed to echo in the empty space of Wayland's carefully constructed solitude. Outside, the city continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, unaware that within one of its highest towers, the first subtle crack had appeared in the Ice King's frozen heart. Eleanor's wish hung in the air like a challenge, a final gift from a mother who had never stopped believing in the warmth her son had locked away. The question remained, would Wayland be brave enough to thaw the walls he'd built, or would his mother's last wish remain unfulfilled, another casualty of past betrayals? As night settled over Manhattan, Wayland Colton stood at his window, his father's letter in one hand, years of protective frost beginning to show the first signs of melting. The journey ahead would test everything he believed about love, trust, and the price of keeping one's heart safe from harm. Chapter 7. The Unexpected Angel. The universe has a peculiar sense of timing. 1 week after Eleanor's revelation, as Wayland grappled with his mother's final wish, fate orchestrated an encounter that would challenge everything he believed about trust, love, and second chances. Annalise Agnes arrived at Colton Industries on a rain-swept Monday morning, her resume as impressive as her quiet confidence. The position was for Director of Humanitarian Initiatives, a role Wayland had created to distance himself from the emotional aspects of his charitable works. What he hadn't expected was the whirlwind of change that would follow her arrival. Standing in the lobby, her dark skin glowing against the crisp white of her tailored suit, Annalise cut a striking figure. Her natural hair was styled in elegant braids, and her eyes held a depth of wisdom that belied her 32 years. But it was her presence, a perfect blend of professional competence and genuine warmth, that made heads turn. "Ms. Agnes is here for the 9 a.m. interview," the receptionist announced through the intercom. Wayland, reviewing her credentials one final time, noted the unusual path that had led her to his door. Born in Ghana, educated at Oxford on scholarship, she had spent the last decade building sustainable development programs across 3 continents. Her references read like a who's who of global humanitarian leaders. The interview was scheduled for 30 minutes. It lasted 2 hours. "Your charitable algorithms are efficient," Annalise observed, studying the holographic displays of Colton Industries' global initiatives, but they're missing the human element that makes help meaningful. Any other candidate would have praised the system's efficiency. Any other candidate would have been shown the door for such criticism. But Annalise spoke with a conviction that demanded attention. "The numbers suggest otherwise," Wayland countered, falling into his familiar pattern of data-driven defense. Annalise's response was to pull up a specific project, a medical facility in Southeast Asia. "Look deeper," she insisted. "Yes, the facility is operating at peak efficiency, but community engagement is minimal. People don't trust machines to understand their needs. They trust people who take the time to understand their stories." Something in her words echoed Eleanor's recent plea, creating a resonance Wayland couldn't quite ignore. "And you believe you can improve these metrics?" His tone was challenging yet curious. "I believe I can help you remember why they matter in the first place." The boldness of her statement hung in the air between them. For a moment, Wayland saw himself reflected in her unwavering gaze. Not the Ice King of industry, but the young idealist he'd once been, believing in the power of human connection. Against every protocol he'd established, Wayland hired her on the spot. The transformation began immediately. Within weeks, Annalise had restructured the humanitarian division, introducing what she called heart metrics, alongside the traditional data points. Her approach was systematic, yet deeply personal, combining Wayland's love for efficiency with a human touch that had been missing for years. Stories of her impact spread through the company like wildfire. She knew everyone's names, from the janitors to the executives. Her lunch breaks were spent mentoring young employees, her evenings often dedicated to video calls with project leaders in different time zones. But it was her handling of the crisis response initiative that truly set her apart. When a devastating earthquake hit a remote region in Nepal, Annalise didn't just deploy resources, she went personally, despite it being far beyond her job description. Wayland watched through live feeds as she coordinated relief efforts on the ground. Her elegant business attire replaced by practical gear, her composure unshaken by the chaos around her. She moved through the disaster zone with purpose, touching lives not just with aid, but with genuine compassion. "Sir," his assistant reported, "Ms. Agnes has increased community engagement by 300% in affected areas. Local participation in long-term reconstruction planning has exceeded all previous records." The numbers were impressive, but it was the stories that began reaching his desk that truly caught his attention. Stories of lives transformed, of hope restored, of communities empowered. Annalise's approach was proving that efficiency and humanity could coexist, something Wayland had long since dismissed as impossible. Yet he maintained his distance, watching her impact spread through carefully constructed barriers. The Ice King's reputation had to be maintained after all. But Annalise seemed unfazed by his cold demeanor, treating him with the same genuine respect she showed everyone else. During board meetings, she would often challenge his purely data-driven decisions, not with emotion, but with evidence of how human connection improved bottom-line results. Her presentations were masterpieces of balance, hard facts supporting soft skills, metrics demonstrating the value of mercy. "Mr. Colton," she said during one such meeting, "your father built this company on the principle that profit and purpose could coexist. The data shows he was right." The mention of his father would have earned anyone else a swift dismissal. But Annalise spoke with such sincere conviction that even Wayland's frozen walls couldn't completely deflect the warmth of her words. Eleanor, visiting the office one afternoon, watched Annalise in action with keen interest. The older woman's eyes took in everything: how employees lit up in Annalise's presence, how projects flourished under her touch, how even Wayland seemed to thaw slightly when she presented her reports. "She's remarkable," Eleanor observed over their next Sunday dinner. "Reminds me of how you used to be before." "Mother," Wayland warned, not ready to traverse that emotional territory. But Eleanor pressed on. "When was the last time you saw someone combine such competence with genuine compassion?" "She's not afraid of your walls, my son, perhaps because she builds bridges instead." Wayland dismissed his mother's obvious matchmaking, but he couldn't dismiss the changes Annalise was bringing to Colton Industries. The company's humanitarian impact had doubled in 6 months, employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, and even the press had begun to notice. "Ice King's empire shows signs of thaw," one headline declared, highlighting the company's renewed focus on human-centered development. Yet it wasn't until the annual charity gala that Wayland truly began to understand the depth of Annalise's impact. She had transformed the usually sterile affair into a celebration of human connection, bringing in actual recipients of Colton Industries' aid to share their stories. Standing at the back of the ballroom, Wayland watched as she effortlessly bridged worlds, connecting billionaire donors with grassroots activists, helping corporate leaders understand the human impact of their contributions. She moved through the crowd with grace, her burgundy gown catching the light, her smile genuine and warm. For a moment, just a moment, he allowed himself to see her as more than an efficient executive. In that brief window of vulnerability, he glimpsed something that both terrified and fascinated him, a soul as deep as his own, but unmarred by frost, unafraid of feeling, capable of mixing strength with softness. But the Ice King's walls were thick, built over years of betrayal and disappointment. One remarkable employee, no matter how impressive, couldn't melt them overnight, or so he thought. Little did Wayland know that fate had more in store. The woman who had begun to transform his company would soon play a much more personal role in his life. For now, though, he retreated behind his familiar frost, watching from a safe distance as Annalise Agnes continued to prove that walls weren't the only way to protect what mattered. Sometimes bridges worked even better. The seeds of change had been planted, though Wayland refused to acknowledge them. In his mother's knowing smile and his own reluctant fascination, the first signs of spring were appearing in the Ice King's frozen kingdom. The question remained, would he allow these seeds to grow, or would fear of another frost kill them before they had a chance to bloom? Chapter 8. The Life-Saving Moment. The night that changed everything began like many others in the life of Wayland Colton. The city lights painted shadows across his office floor as he worked late, the clock on his desk silently marking the passage of time well past midnight. The Ice King's kingdom was quiet, most employees long gone, leaving only the soft hum of computers and the distant sounds of the cleaning crew. What Wayland didn't know was that Annalise Agnes was still in her office, burning the midnight oil as she finalized proposals for a new emergency response system in developing nations. Her dedication matched his own, though their motivations differed. His driven by the need for control, hers by the desire to make a difference. The first sign that something was wrong came subtly. A slight pressure in his chest that Wayland dismissed as stress, a sensation of heaviness he attributed to another long day. The Ice King had spent years ignoring his body's warnings, treating his physical form as just another resource to be maximized. At precisely 12:47 a.m., the pressure transformed into something impossible to ignore. Sharp pain radiated down his left arm, and a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. Wayland found himself gripping his desk, his vision blurring at the edges. "No," he muttered, reaching for his phone with trembling fingers. "Not now. Not like this." The device slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor just as another wave of pain crashed through his chest. As he tried to stand, his legs betrayed him, and the mighty Ice King found himself falling, his empire of glass and steel suddenly meaningless in the face of mortality. The sound of his collapse echoed through the empty corridor. In another time, in another version of Colton Industries, there would have been no one to hear it. But fate, or perhaps something more divine, had kept Annalise working late that night. She heard the thud from her office down the hall. Most people would have dismissed it, would have assumed it was the cleaning crew. But Annalise Agnes had spent years in crisis zones, where survival often depended on paying attention to the smallest details. Her heels clicked rapidly against the marble floor as she investigated, her heart racing with an inexplicable sense of urgency. The sight that greeted her through Wayland's office door would be forever etched in her memory. The powerful CEO crumpled on the floor, his face contorted in pain. "Mr. Colton." Her voice carried the perfect blend of authority and concern as she rushed to his side. Wayland tried to wave her away, his pride fighting even as his body betrayed him. "I'm fine, just need a moment." But Annalise was already in motion, her training from countless humanitarian missions kicking in. Her fingers found his pulse, rapid and irregular, while her other hand was already dialing emergency services. "Sir, I need you to listen to me carefully," she spoke with calm authority, even as she loosened his tie and helped him into a more comfortable position. "You're having a heart attack. I'm going to help you, but you need to trust me right now." Trust. The word penetrated even through his pain. The Ice King had built his latter empire on the very absence of trust, and yet here he was, his life quite literally in someone else's hands. Annalise's actions were swift and precise. From her bag, she produced aspirin, carried as part of her own emergency kit from years of fieldwork. "Chew this," she instructed, her voice leaving no room for argument. "It will help thin your blood." Through the haze of pain, Wayland found himself studying her face. There was no panic in her expression, no hesitation in her movements. This was Annalise in her element, caring for others with both competence and compassion. "The ambulance is 4 minutes out," she informed him, her hand never leaving his wrist as she monitored his pulse. "Try to take slow, steady breaths. Focus on my voice." To his surprise, Wayland found himself doing exactly that. Her voice became an anchor, something to hold on to as waves of pain and fear threatened to overwhelm him. She began telling him about the project she'd been working on, her words creating a steady rhythm that helped regulate his breathing. "You know," she said softly, "in many of the communities I've worked with, they believe that a heart attack is the body's way of telling us we've ignored it for too long, that we've forgotten to listen to our own humanity." Under normal circumstances, Wayland would have dismissed such sentiment. But there was something about hovering between life and death that made even the Ice King receptive to deeper truths. The paramedics arrived like a whirlwind of efficiency, but it was Annalise's presence that kept him grounded. She rattled off his medical history with surprising accuracy, detailed the symptoms and timing, and even knew about his family's history of heart conditions, information she had obviously gleaned from her thorough approach to her work. "Ma'am, are you family?" one paramedic asked as they prepared to transport him. "No," Wayland found himself answering, his voice weak but clear. "She's more important. She's the one who saved my life." The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and medical terminology, but Annalise's steady presence remained. She had climbed into the ambulance without hesitation, still feeding the paramedics relevant information while keeping one eye on Wayland's condition. In the emergency room, Dr. James Peterson took charge of Wayland's care. The veteran cardiologist had seen countless heart attacks in his career, but something about this case struck him as remarkable. "Mr. Colton," Dr. Peterson would later say, "if Miss Agnes hadn't administered emergency care and called me immediately, we would be having a very different conversation. Her knowledge of heart attack symptoms and immediate response made the difference between life and death. You're a lucky man." The following hours were a whirlwind of tests, procedures, and medical discussions. Through it all, Annalise remained, handling calls to Eleanor, managing the inevitable media circus that arose when news broke of the Ice King's vulnerability, and ensuring that both the hospital staff and Wayland's family had everything they needed. When Eleanor arrived, her face pale with worry, it was Annalise who greeted her with a warm embrace and a detailed explanation of everything that had happened. The older woman's eyes filled with tears of gratitude as she listened to how this remarkable woman had saved her son's life. "You truly are an angel," Eleanor whispered, clutching Annalise's hands. "God must have sent you to us." Later that night, as Wayland lay in his private room, the machines beeping a steady reminder of his mortality, he found himself watching Annalise through half-closed eyes. She sat in the corner, quietly working on her laptop, having refused to leave until she was certain he was stable. In the soft hospital lighting, he saw her differently, not just as the capable executive who had transformed his company's humanitarian work, but as someone who had held his life in her hands and handled it with both strength and tenderness. The walls he'd built over 15 years seemed somehow less substantial in the face of such authentic care. "Why did you stay?" he asked, his voice rough from the tubes they'd used during treatment. Annalise looked up, her eyes full of something that challenged his cynical worldview. "Because every person deserves to have someone in their corner, Mr. Colton, even Ice Kings." The simple honesty of her answer struck deeper than any corporate strategy or business negotiation ever had. For the first time in years, Wayland Colton felt something inside his carefully frozen heart begin to shift, like the first crack in winter ice when spring whispers its arrival. What he didn't know was that this night would mark more than just a medical emergency survived. It would become the moment when the universe, through Annalise Agnes's hands, began the delicate work of thawing the Ice King's heart. The question remained, would he have the courage to let the warmth in, or would old fears keep him frozen in his solitary kingdom? Chapter 9. The Contract. The sterile light of Wayland Colton's hospital room dimmed as dusk painted soft shadows across the walls. Outside, the city's rhythm continued unabated, indifferent to the monumental shifts within the heart of its famed Ice King. Weeks had passed since the heart attack, and the man who had once prided himself on impenetrable fortresses, both physical and emotional, found himself confronting vulnerabilities he had long buried. Annalise Agnes's presence had been both a balm and a disruption to his carefully ordered life. She had proven herself indispensable, not only in the moments of crisis, but in the steady, transformative changes she brought to his company, and, unwittingly, to him. Her competence was undeniable, but it was her compassion that unsettled him most. For the first time in years, Wayland questioned the cost of his solitude. It was during a Sunday dinner, one of the first since his hospitalization, that Eleanor Colton broached the subject that would alter the trajectory of his life once more. "Wayland," she began, her tone gentle but resolute, "we need to talk about your legacy." The word landed heavily between them. Eleanor had been patient, watching her son navigate the balance between rebuilding his company and regaining his health. Yet she knew her time was slipping away, and with it, the chance to ensure he did not face the future alone. "I've built my legacy," Wayland replied, his voice calm but guarded. "Colton Industries will outlast us all." "I'm not talking about the company," Eleanor countered, her gaze unyielding. "I'm talking about you, about family, about a future that doesn't revolve solely around balance sheets and quarterly reports." Wayland looked down at his plate, the appetite he'd regained since his recovery suddenly gone. He knew where this conversation was heading, and he wasn't ready for it. "You can't build everything on your own," Eleanor pressed, "and you can't deny that Annalise has already brought life back to parts of Colton Industries that were frozen." His hand tightened around his glass, the cool weight grounding him. "She's an exceptional director, Mother. But this is about more than business," Eleanor interrupted, her voice softening but losing none of its determination. "You owe it to yourself to find someone who challenges you, supports you, understands you. Annalise has already proven she's capable of all that. If you'd let her, she might prove much more." The silence stretched between them until Eleanor finally sighed. "You won't see it now, but love isn't just about grand gestures or ideal conditions. Sometimes it's about a contract, a promise to build something greater than the sum of its parts. And Wayland, you need to start building before it's too late." The words lingered in Wayland's mind over the following days, gnawing at the walls he'd built around himself. He reviewed Annalise's progress reports with an intensity that surpassed his usual meticulousness, searching for faults to distract him from the seed Eleanor had planted. Instead, he found nothing but evidence of her unparalleled competence and the unmistakable warmth she brought to every endeavor. Finally, unable to ignore the shift in his thoughts, Wayland requested a private meeting with Annalise. It was framed as a strategic discussion, but both knew it was far more. She arrived promptly at his penthouse office, her professionalism impeccable, despite the unspoken tension between them. Her dark eyes met his with the same calm assurance that had guided her through crises and boardrooms alike. "Mr. Colton," she greeted, taking a seat across from him. "You wanted to see me." Wayland leaned back in his chair, the weight of his decision pressing heavily on him. "Annalise," he began, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant, "I have a proposition for you." Her brow arched slightly, curiosity flickering across her face. "Go on." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a sleek leather folder, sliding it across the polished surface toward her. Inside was a contract, written in the precise legal language that defined his world. "I want to propose a partnership," he explained, his voice steady now, like a man delivering a pitch he'd rehearsed countless times. "A marriage, in name and legal standing, built on mutual respect and shared goals." Annalise blinked, her composure momentarily slipping. "Marriage? Conditional upon the birth of a child," he clarified, his words measured but devoid of the warmth such a topic typically required. "You've already proven your value as a leader and a visionary. I believe you would make an equally exceptional partner in a broader sense. Together, we could create not just a legacy for the company, but for the Colton name." Her silence stretched like taut wire. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, though her expression revealed a depth of emotion Wayland could not fully decipher. "And what role does love play in this partnership?" He hesitated, the question striking at the heart of his proposal's flaw. "Love is optional. It can grow in time or not. What matters is that we create something lasting, something neither of us could achieve alone." Annalise studied him carefully, her mind a whirl of calculations and emotions. She had seen many sides of Wayland Colton, the ruthless businessman, the visionary leader, the vulnerable man who had nearly died in her arms. This offer, clinical as it was, revealed yet another facet. A man grappling with the ghosts of his past, desperately seeking a way to secure his future without risking his heart. "Why me?" she asked finally, her voice quiet but firm. "Because you've already proven you can handle the worst parts of me," he admitted, his eyes meeting hers with an honesty that was rare even for him. "And because I trust you." The weight of his words settled over them both. Trust. It was the cornerstone of the contract, the foundation of his fragile offer. For Wayland, it was the most he could give. For Annalise, it was the ultimate challenge. "I'll need time to think about this," she said, rising from her seat with the folder in hand. "It's not a decision I can make lightly." "Of course," Wayland replied, his voice even, though something in his chest tightened as she turned to leave. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Wayland sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights casting long shadows across his face. The Ice King had extended an olive branch, but whether it would bloom or wither remained uncertain. For Annalise, the contract represented more than just a business opportunity. It was a glimpse into the heart of a man who had spent years guarding it, a chance to bridge the divide between his logic and her compassion. In the weeks that followed, as the world turned and business continued, the terms of the contract remained unspoken but ever present. Wayland found himself waiting, not for an answer, but for the outcome of a gamble he had never expected to make. Would Annalise agree to the terms, accepting the risks and rewards of such an unorthodox arrangement? Or would she refuse, leaving Wayland to retreat once more into the safety of his icy walls? Only time would tell if the seeds of Eleanor's wish and Wayland's tentative trust could grow into something greater, or if they would wither under the weight of fear and doubt. And so, the Ice King waited, his carefully constructed kingdom trembling ever so slightly under the possibility of change. Chapter 10. Miracles times 3. The news arrived on a crisp winter morning, carried on the breath of frost that seemed to hang perpetually over Wayland Colton's life. Annalise Agnes, now Mrs. Colton in name and contract, sat across from him in the sprawling warmth of their shared dining room. She was holding a small white envelope that would change everything. "Well," Wayland prompted, his tone professional, his hands clasped tightly on the polished wood table. The contract between them had been signed 6 months earlier, yet its implications felt as unreal to him as the snow swirling outside. Annalise smiled, her eyes shining with an emotion he couldn't name. "You're going to be a father, Waylon." The words hung in the air, a moment of stillness that seemed to stretch forever. Waylon's first instinct was to reach for control, his mind racing to quantify, analyze, and prepare. But no amount of strategy could have prepared him for what came next. 2 months later, during a routine ultrasound, the doctor paused, his expression shifting from calm professionalism to something akin to awe. "Is everything all right?" Annalise asked, her hand instinctively tightening on Waylon's, a habit she had developed despite his reluctance to reciprocate such intimacy. The doctor turned to them with a broad smile. "Not one heartbeat, not two, three. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Colton. You're expecting triplets." The announcement stunned everyone. Eleanor, frail but still sharp-witted, burst into tears of joy when she heard the news. "3 miracles at once," she exclaimed, gripping Annalise's hands tightly. "You've given our family something beyond even my wildest dreams." The media, always eager for a Colton headline, exploded with the story. "Colton Empire heirs arrive," read the tabloids, plastered with photos of Annalise, radiant as ever, and Waylon, his expression unreadable as usual. Speculation about the future of Colton Industries reached a fever pitch. Would Waylon's legendary focus on his company finally shift toward his family? Would the Ice King thaw under the warmth of fatherhood? The world had its theories, but only Annalise saw the truth. Waylon kept his emotional distance, attending doctor's appointments like board meetings. His questions focused on logistics rather than feelings, his office filled with charts and plans, trust funds, educational blueprints, security protocols. Everything except the emotional groundwork of being a father. For Annalise, pregnancy was a transformation. She embraced the experience with the same passion she brought to everything else, balancing her demanding role at Colton Industries with preparations for motherhood. She decorated the nursery herself, painting the walls with a mural of a magical forest. She read every book on raising multiples, her laughter filling their once sterile penthouse as she joked about needing the efficiency of a CEO and the patience of a saint. Despite his emotional distance, Waylon was attentive in his own way. He ensured she had the best medical care, hired a nutritionist, and even installed a state-of-the-art nursery monitoring system. His actions spoke of a man trying to fulfill his obligations, yet something deeper, something unspoken, lingered beneath the surface. "Waylon," Annalise said one evening as they sat in the glow of the nursery's soft lights, "you don't have to keep your distance. These babies are yours as much as they are mine." He looked at her, his icy blue eyes flickering with something she couldn't quite place. "I'm not keeping my distance," he said quietly. "I'm preparing." "For what?" "For everything that can go wrong." Annalise sighed, understanding his fears but saddened by his inability to see the joy beneath them. "Sometimes," she said softly, "you have to trust that not everything will go wrong. Sometimes miracles happen." The day of the births arrived like a tempest. Annalise went into labor 3 weeks early, her calm professionalism replaced by sharp, urgent breaths. Waylon, for all his meticulous planning, found himself overwhelmed. The hospital room buzzed with activity, doctors and nurses moving with practiced precision. Waylon stood at her side, his hand in hers, his mask of control cracking as he watched her endure the storm of labor. "You're doing great," he said, his voice low and steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. "You've got this." For hours the battle raged, and then, one by one, the cries of new life filled the room. "Baby A, a boy," the doctor announced, holding up the first newborn. "Baby B, another boy," came the second announcement. "Baby C, a girl." The final cry echoed like a symphony. Waylon's knees nearly gave way as he stared at the tiny miracles before him. The nurses carefully placed each baby in Annalise's arms, her face glowing with maternal joy, even as exhaustion claimed her. "They're perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Wayland nodded, unable to speak. His world, once so meticulously constructed, had just been irreversibly changed. The births made international headlines. The New York Times ran a front-page story. "Colton Triplets, a new era begins." Social media buzzed with speculation about the names, the legacy, and the impact these three tiny heirs would have on the Colton empire. But for Wayland, the significance was far more personal. Standing in the quiet of the hospital's nursery that night, watching his newborn children sleep, he felt something stir within him, a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. Annalise's voice broke the silence. "You can hold them, you know." He turned to find her standing in the doorway, her figure silhouetted by the soft light. She walked over, placing their daughter gently in his arms. The tiny weight of her against his chest was both terrifying and grounding. "Meet your daddy," Annalise whispered, her eyes shining with a mixture of love and hope. For the first time in years, Wayland Colton allowed himself to hope too. As he gazed down at his daughter, her brothers sleeping soundly beside her, the Ice King felt the first true crack in his frozen heart. Miracles times 3 had entered his life, and with them came the possibility of a thaw that might finally last. Chapter 11. The Final Test. The Colton penthouse was unusually quiet. The nursery monitors hummed softly, casting a serene glow across the sprawling space. In the nursery, 3 tiny miracles slept peacefully, their rhythmic breaths punctuating the stillness of the night. But in the study, a storm brewed, one that threatened to unravel everything. Wayland Colton sat behind his desk, the weight of his decisions bearing down on him like an iron shroud. Before him lay an envelope, thick and foreboding, containing a single sheet of paper with a number scrawled in bold, $1 million. It was not a bribe, not a purchase, but a test born of years of mistrust and fear. Annalise stood before him, her figure poised but trembling. She had always been the calm in the storm, the bridge between his icy world and the warmth of humanity. But tonight, she was a mother whose heart had been torn by the cruelness of the man she had agreed to build a life with. "What is this?" Her voice cracked as she held up the paper, her eyes brimming with tears. Wayland's face was unreadable, his tone measured as he spoke. "It's an offer." "An offer?" she repeated, her voice rising. "You're offering me money to walk away from my own children? From the life we've created? How dare you, Wayland?" "It's a test," he admitted, leaning forward, his hands clasped tightly. "I need to know—" "Know what?" she interrupted, her tears falling freely now. "Know if I'm like the others? If I'm another Victoria, another Sarah? If I would abandon these children for a check no matter how many zeros? You add?" Wayland's gaze faltered, his own inner conflict written in the tense line of his jaw. "You don't understand. No, you don't understand." Annalise's voice broke, her hands trembling as she clutched the paper. "These children are worth more than all the money in the world. They're pieces of my soul, of our story. How dare you try to price a mother's love?" Wayland's chest tightened at her words, the raw emotion cutting through him like a blade. He had expected anger, indignation, perhaps even scorn, but the depth of her response, the way her voice cracked with the weight of her love for their children, shattered something inside him. "This isn't about them," he said quietly, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. "It's about me, about trust." Annalise's laughter was bitter, her tears glistening in the low light. "Trust? You think you can measure trust with a dollar amount? Wayland, trust isn't something you test, it's something you give, freely, without conditions." Her words struck deep, peeling back layers of frost that had taken decades to form. For a man who had built his empire on control, on contracts and conditions, the idea of unconditional trust was foreign, terrifying even. I've been betrayed before, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Twice. By people I thought, people I trusted. You can't keep punishing me for their mistakes, Annalise interrupted, her voice softening as she saw the vulnerability in his eyes. I am not Victoria. I am not Sarah. And these children, they aren't just your heirs, Waylon. They're your chance to finally have something real, something that isn't bound by contracts or contingencies. Waylon stood, his towering figure suddenly seeming smaller under the weight of her words. He walked to the window, staring out at the glittering city below. The view that once symbolized his dominance now felt empty, a reflection of the walls he had built around himself. I don't know how to trust, he admitted, his voice trembling with the weight of years spent guarding his heart. I don't know how to let go. Annalise stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his arm. Trust isn't something you know, Waylon. It's something you choose, and right now you have to choose. Choose to believe in me, in us, in the family we're building. Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a plea all at once. Waylon turned to face her, his icy blue eyes meeting hers, filled with a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice breaking. I've been so afraid of losing everything that I forgot what it means to have something worth holding on to. Annalise reached up, wiping a tear from his cheek. It's not too late, Waylon, but you have to stop testing me. You have to let yourself believe. For the first time, he let himself feel the full weight of her love, the love she had poured into their children, into him, into a life that could be so much more if only he had the courage to embrace it. He took the envelope from her hands, tearing it in half and letting the pieces fall to the floor. No more tests, he said firmly, his voice steady now. No more contracts, just us. Annalise smiled through her tears, the tension in her body finally easing. That's all I ever wanted. The next morning, Waylon watched as Annalise cradled their 3 tiny miracles in her arms, her laughter filling the nursery with a warmth that melted the last remnants of his frost. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust would take time, and love would require a vulnerability he wasn't used to. But for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't dared to hope for: peace. As he held his daughter, her tiny fingers curling around his, Waylon made a silent promise, not just to his children, but to Annalise and to himself. He would no longer let fear dictate his life. He would no longer let the ghosts of the past rob him of the future he now had a chance to build. The Ice King was melting, and in the warmth of his family's love, Waylon Colton began to rediscover the man he once was, the man he could be again. Chapter 12. The Letter of Goodbye. The Colton penthouse was silent, the absence of laughter and life ringing louder than the sound of Annalise's footsteps as she moved through its cavernous spaces for the last time. The twins were sleeping peacefully in the nursery, their soft breaths echoing in the stillness. Annalise lingered at the doorway, her heart aching as she took in their tiny forms, the spitting image of their father in every way that mattered. In her hand was the letter, the words that had taken her countless nights to write, every line infused with love, pain, and the hope that one day Waylon would understand. She left the envelope on Waylon's desk, its stark white glaring against the dark mahogany. Inside was not just her farewell, but a piece of her heart, a sacrifice made in the name of a love she had fought so hard to believe in. Waylon returned to the penthouse after 40 days, his absence dictated by business, though his thoughts had rarely strayed from home. The trip had been a whirlwind of meetings and negotiations, yet in the quiet moments between, his mind wandered to Annalise and the children. He had begun to wonder if the walls he'd built so high could finally come down, If the love he saw in Annalise's eyes was enough to melt what remained of his frost-bitten heart. But as he stepped into the empty living room, the echo of his footsteps against the marble told him something was wrong. The usual hum of life, the soft coos of the babies, the sound of Annalise humming a lullaby, was absent. "Annalise!" he called out, his voice tinged with uncertainty. There was no reply, only the oppressive silence. His chest tightened as he moved through the apartment, each empty room confirming his growing fear. In the nursery, the babies slept peacefully, their cribs lined neatly as though nothing had changed. But Annalise was gone. His heart pounded as he entered his study, his sharp eyes immediately catching the envelope on his desk. The sight of her handwriting on the front stopped him in his tracks. "Waylon!" He sat heavily in his chair, his fingers trembling as they broke the seal. The words inside cut deeper than any betrayal, each line a blade that sliced through the armor he had worn for years. "Dearest Waylon, my heart breaks with each word I write. These past months have taught me that love isn't about contracts or conditions. It's about the way my soul recognizes yours, even when you push me away. Our babies have your eyes, your determination, your spirit. They deserve a father who can love freely, not one trapped in the prison of past pain. I have tried to be the bridge between the man you are and the man I know you can become, but I cannot force you to cross it. Your walls are too high, your fear too great, and I can no longer watch as you hold yourself back from the love that stands before you. I'm leaving not because I don't love you. I leave because I love you too much to watch you suffer in this half-life of distrust. The children will remain with you, as per our agreement. They need at least one parent who can give them a secure future. I know you will protect and provide for them in the only way you know how. And for that, I am grateful. Please know that this isn't a goodbye born of bitterness. It is a farewell of hope. I hope that one day you will find the courage to face your fears, to open your heart, to embrace the love that has always been waiting for you. Until then, I will love you from afar, as I have loved you from the moment I saw the man beneath the Ice King's crown. Know that each night I'll look at the stars and remember the moments when I saw your heart's true light. Those moments were fleeting, but they were enough to illuminate my soul. With eternal love, Annalise Waylon read the letter once, then again, the words searing into his memory. Each sentence brought a fresh wave of pain, stripping away the layers of control he had clung to for so long. By the time he finished, the paper trembled in his hands, damp with the tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in years. He looked around the empty room, the emptiness a reflection of the life he had built, not just without Annalise, but without trust, without vulnerability, without the love she had so freely offered him. The walls he had erected to protect himself now felt like a prison, and for the first time he saw them for what they truly were. The babies stirred in the nursery, their soft cries breaking the stillness. Waylon rose, his movements mechanical as he made his way to them. He looked down at his children, so small, so innocent, so unaware of the pain their parents carried. His daughter's tiny fingers curled around his, grounding him in a way he hadn't expected. He thought of Annalise's words, "They deserve a father who can love freely." For the first time in his life, Waylon Colton allowed himself to feel not just the pain of her absence, but the love she had tried so desperately to show him. It was overwhelming, a flood that threatened to drown him, but he didn't resist it. He let it wash over him, each tear a crack in the icy walls that had kept him trapped for so long. He looked up at the stars, visible through the nursery window, their light a reminder of her parting words. He had lost her, but in doing so, he had found something he hadn't realized he was searching for, the courage to change. The next morning, Waylon stood in the nursery, the letter folded carefully in his pocket. He made a silent vow to his children and to himself. He would find Annalise. He would bring her back, not because he needed her to fulfill a contract, but because he needed her to help him become the man she had always believed he could be. It would not be easy. Love never was. But for the first time, Waylon was willing to try. And as the first rays of dawn broke over the city, illuminating the nursery in soft gold, the Ice King knew his journey was far from over. Chapter 13. The Search. The city buzzed with whispers of Waylon Colton's uncharacteristic mission. Known for his precision and control, the Ice King had embarked on a search that defied his calculated nature. No spreadsheets, no algorithms, just raw determination fueled by regret, guilt, and a love he had been too blind to see in time. Every resource at his disposal was mobilized. Private investigators scoured records, cross-referenced flights, and trawled through CCTV footage. Waylon himself personally oversaw the efforts, a man transformed by the ache of Annalise's absence. The search began with the obvious: hotels, airports, rental agencies, but Annalise had always been a step ahead. Her careful planning left no paper trail, no clues for his investigators to follow. For weeks, Waylon pored over leads that dissolved into dead ends, the frustration building with every false report. "She's not using her name," his lead investigator explained, "but she's traveling light. No credit card use, no large withdrawals. She doesn't want to be found." Waylon's jaw tightened. "Everyone leaves a trace," he said coldly, though his heart ached at the thought of Annalise, alone and determined to stay that way. Find hers. Weeks turned into a month, and Waylon's desperation grew. The city began to notice. Headlines shifted from business speculation to stories of his personal quest. Colton CEO searches for love lost read one particularly biting headline, accompanied by an old photo of Waylon and Annalise at a charity gala. Waylon ignored the publicity, his focus solely on finding her. He spent nights in the nursery, watching his children sleep and clutching the letter she had left behind. Her words haunted him, but they also gave him purpose. He read them so often that he could recite them by heart. "Each night, I'll look at the stars and remember the moments when I saw your heart's true light." It was in the 5th week of the search that a breakthrough finally came. A small bed and breakfast owner in upstate New York recognized Annalise's photo. "Yes, she stayed here," the elderly woman confirmed, her kind eyes softening as she recalled the memory. "She didn't say much, but I could tell she was carrying a heavy heart. She had 3 tiny baby blankets with her, beautiful ones she'd knitted herself. I often found her sitting by the fire at night, holding them and crying." Waylon's chest constricted. He could picture Annalise, the firelight catching the tears on her cheeks, the weight of her love and sorrow tangible in every thread of those blankets. "Is she still here?" he asked, his voice tight with urgency. The woman shook her head. "No, but she left just a few days ago. Headed toward the coast, I believe. She mentioned needing time by the ocean." The search shifted to coastal towns, small seaside villages where Annalise might have sought refuge. Waylon personally visited every lead, driving through quiet streets and scanning beaches for her familiar silhouette. Each passing day chipped away at the icy armor he had spent years constructing. In every town, he asked the same questions, showed the same photo. "Have you seen this woman? She has 3 children, 3 blankets." His voice would falter slightly, the thought of her knitting those blankets for their children, a labor of love she had never mentioned, rendering him vulnerable in ways he wasn't prepared for. Finally, in a quiet New England harbor town, he found her. It was early evening when Waylon arrived, the salty breeze carrying the sound of waves and distant laughter. He approached the owner of a small cafe, who confirmed Annalise had been staying in a nearby cottage. "She comes here every morning," the cafe owner said. "Always orders tea and sits by the window, staring at the ocean. She looks lost." Waylon nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you." The cottage was modest, its white clapboard siding glowing in the fading sunlight. Wayland hesitated at the gate, the letter in his pocket a constant reminder of why he was here. He took a deep breath and walked to the door, his heart pounding as he raised his hand to knock. The door opened before he could. Annalise stood there, her eyes wide with shock and her breath catching in her throat. She looked different, softer, more fragile, but the strength he had always admired still radiated from her. "Wayland," she whispered, her voice a mixture of surprise and guarded emotion. "I found you," he said simply, his voice heavy with relief and exhaustion. She stepped back, allowing him inside without a word. The cottage was warm, filled with the soft hum of the ocean and the faint scent of lavender. On the couch lay the 3 baby blankets, neatly folded but well loved. "Why are you here?" she asked finally, her arms crossing defensively as she leaned against the wall. Wayland reached into his pocket, pulling out her letter. "This," he said, holding it up, "this is why. Because I read it 100 times, and every time I did, I realized what a fool I've been." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. "I tested you," he continued, his voice breaking. "I doubted you, pushed you away, made you feel like you weren't enough. But Annalise, you were always enough. I was the one who wasn't." "Wayland," she began, but he shook his head, stepping closer. "I don't deserve you," he said, his voice raw. "But I'm here because I want to try, to be the man you believed I could be. For you, for our children, for us." The words hung in the air, vulnerable and unguarded. Annalise stared at him, her tears falling silently as she searched his face for the truth behind his words. And for the first time she saw it. The man beneath the Ice King's crown, stripped of his walls, offering her not a contract, but his heart. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, Wayland. I left because I couldn't keep waiting for you to let me in." He nodded, his own tears glistening in the fading light. "I'm letting you in now, if you'll still have me." For a moment the only sound was the distant crash of waves. Then slowly, Annalise closed the distance between them, her arms wrapping around him as the walls between them finally crumbled. "You found me," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You really found me." "I'll always find you," he promised, holding her tightly as the ocean breeze swept through the open door. For the first time in years, Wayland Colton felt truly at home, not in the penthouse, not in the empire he had built, but in the arms of the woman who had taught him how to love again. Chapter 14. Love's Triumph. The day Wayland Colton found Annalise Agnes at the small coastal cottage marked the beginning of a love story that would echo through time, not because of its grandeur, but because of its unwavering truth. Their reunion became the stuff of local legend, a tale whispered in the harbour town's cafes, retold with awe and wonder. The powerful CEO, known for his icy demeanour, had fallen to his knees on the humble wooden floor of the cottage, begging for forgiveness, his voice trembling with emotion. "I failed you," he had said, his tears flowing freely as Annalise stood stunned before him. "I failed us. But I am here now, and I'll never stop trying to make it right." Annalise, her heart both heavy and hopeful, had listened. She had always seen glimpses of the man Wayland could be, the man he was now bearing fully, stripped of ego and fear. In his vulnerability, she found the courage to believe again. "I never wanted you to be perfect, Wayland," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I only ever wanted you to let me in." And he had. That moment, that small act of humility and love, began the transformation that would define their lives. A grand but intimate wedding. Their wedding, held 6 months later, was a juxtaposition of scale and spirit. It was grand in size because of who Wayland Colton was, a man whose name commanded attention, and whose reputation drew people from across the globe. Yet, beneath the glittering chandeliers and amidst the sea of designer gowns, the ceremony itself was profoundly intimate. Every detail reflected the journey they had traveled together. Annalise walked down the aisle, wearing a gown of simple elegance, her veil adorned with tiny embroidered stars, a tribute to the night she had looked to the heavens, whispering her love for Waylon into the cosmos. Waylon, standing tall but visibly emotional, watched her approach with an expression that spoke of reverence and redemption. Their vows were not rehearsed declarations but raw, heartfelt promises. Waylon's voice trembled as he said, "I stand before you not as a perfect man, but as a man willing to spend the rest of his life proving my love for you. You are my beginning, my middle, and my forever." Annalise, her tears glistening under the soft glow of the lights, replied, "You are proof that love isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up, together. You are my partner, my anchor, my home." Their children, now toddlers, were a part of the ceremony. Each carried a small bouquet that they shyly handed to their mother, drawing laughter and tears from the guests. Eleanor Colton, frail but radiant with pride, watched with a contented smile, knowing she had lived to see the seeds of her hope blossom into something extraordinary, a legacy of love. 25 years later, their love story became a cornerstone of local history. Schools taught it not as a fairy tale, but as an example of resilience, redemption, and the transformative power of trust. The once feared Ice King of business had become a symbol of warmth and integrity, his empire now known not just for its success, but for its commitment to humanity. At 71, Waylon Colton remained a striking figure, his silver hair and weathered face a testament to a life well lived. Yet, his most captivating feature was the way he looked at Annalise, now 50, with the same awe and devotion he had on the day of their wedding. Their grandchildren gathered around them every evening, sitting cross-legged on the floor of their sunlit veranda. The Colton estate, though sprawling and opulent, felt more like a home than a monument. The walls were lined with family photographs from the early days of their marriage to the milestones of their children and grandchildren. "Tell us the story again," one of the youngest begged, her wide eyes shining with anticipation. Waylon chuckled, his deep voice carrying the warmth of a grandfather's love. "You've heard it 100 times, little one." "One more time," the children chorused, their voices blending into a harmonious plea. Annalise smiled, her hand resting gently on Waylon's arm. "It's their favorite, after all, and it's ours too." With a deep breath, Waylon began. He spoke not just of the pain and mistakes, but of the courage it took to face them, the strength Annalise had shown in loving him despite his flaws, and the joy they had found in building a life together. As he recounted the pivotal moments, the letter she left, the search that spanned weeks, the reunion that healed their broken hearts, his voice grew thick with emotion. The children listened intently, their young minds absorbing not just the story, but the lessons within it. A life fulfilled. Their legacy wasn't just in their children or their empire. It was in the lives they had touched, the hearts they had inspired, and the love they had cultivated in each other. Annalise had brought warmth to Waylon's frozen world, and he had shown her the depth of his devotion through every action, every choice, every word. In their twilight years, they often sat together on the veranda, holding hands as the sun dipped below the horizon. The love that had once seemed so fragile had become their greatest strength, a light that had guided them through the darkest of times. "Do you ever think about the beginning?" Annalise asked one evening, her voice soft and contemplative. Waylon smiled, his thumb gently tracing circles on her hand. "I think about how close I came to losing it all, and how lucky I am that you stayed long enough for me to find you again." Annalise rested her head on his shoulder, her heart full. You found me because you finally let yourself be found. Message to the betrayed, cheated, and divorced. At the heart of Waylon and Annalise's story lies a message for those who have faced betrayal, heartbreak, or loss. You are not defined by the pain someone else caused. Healing is not linear, and trust is not easily rebuilt, but you are worthy of love that sees your scars and chooses you anyway. Be patient with yourself, and never stop believing in the power of renewal. Even after the deepest wounds, the heart's capacity to love remains infinite. It simply needs the right person to awaken it. In the end, Waylon and Annalise's journey proved one universal truth. Love is not perfect, but it is powerful. It demands courage, forgiveness, and vulnerability. But for those willing to embrace its challenges, it offers the greatest reward, a life lived in the light of connection, trust, and true partnership. Subscribe if you liked, and thanks for listening our story. God bless you.